Patrick, thanks for being with us. Some Christians love the idea that the law in Western countries really is based on the Bible. Is that in any sense true?
I don't think it is. There have been influences of the Bible on the laws of England and the laws of other common law countries and also the laws of civil law countries in the past, but there have been lots of influences upon the law, and you have to think about law in terms of what is needed for any society to survive. Any society needs laws of property. Thou shalt not steal. Any laws, any society needs laws about personal integrity. You shall not murder. So all societies have those sorts of laws, at least all developed and civilized societies have those sorts of laws. And we shouldn't necessarily think that they are somehow unique to the Christian faith.
So is there any sense in which Christianity has informed Australia's legislation?
There is, and in particularly in one area called equity. There was a whole body of law developed from a court which was run by senior bishops in England in the Middle Ages. And they relied on conscience rather than rules in order to determine the outcomes for disputes. Let me give you an example. The law often will say that you need to have something in writing and signed in order for it to be valid. What happens if somebody uses the lack of writing, the lack of a signature, to take advantage of somebody else? In those situations, you may need an exception to the rule. A situation, for example, where a son persuades his elderly mother to give him her house on the basis that she can live there for the rest of her life, and then a year or so into that arrangement throws her out because he's got the legal title. And where was the agreement? Nothing in writing, nothing signed. In those situations, the English courts, based upon conscience and led by senior bishops, would say, no, the rule is this, but in conscience you are bound to allow her to stay in the home for the rest of her life. And those principles, based upon equity, upon fairness, upon conscience, are still a very important part of Australian law today.
Are there higher laws, laws beyond the simple legislation of a nation state? I'm thinking of the Nuremberg defence.
Yes, I think there are laws which are essential for any society to exist. We mentioned laws of property, laws about personal integrity, laws about telling the truth in court, which any society needs to exist. And in a situation where governments have just gone totally off the rails, as Nazi Germany did, and other societies do, I think we can hold people to the fundamental laws which any society ought to have. And these legal scholars call natural law principles. And they're the things which every child learned in the playground. Those sorts of fundamental laws which everybody ought to know, I think represent the higher law for the world.
This ties into the question of human rights, in a sense. Can you tell us the story of human rights language in law?
Human rights language in law derived almost entirely from this idea of natural law, the idea that there were natural rules that any society needed to exist, many of them based upon Christian values and Christian teachings in the past in Western societies. And these were termed natural rights, natural rights. We now talk about them as human rights. And these days people say, oh, they're based upon the agreement of the international community. In a sense they are, but the historic basis is this idea that there are natural rights which we ought to respect about any human being. By the virtue of being human, we ought to respect their rights. And that was the case, for example, for the abolition of slavery. That Christians like William Wilberforce could not justify the enslavement of a human being who was made in the image of God and who we understood ought to be seen as having natural rights, human rights.
But philosophically, where do those rights come from? What is the ground of those so-called natural laws or human rights?
I don't think ultimately you can really talk sensibly about human rights unless you believe in absolute truth and you believe in absolute values. We really do shade this. We don't like to talk about right and wrong, but there are fundamentally in society things which are right and things which are wrong. And when we move away from a belief in absolute right and wrong, we move away from any coherent basis for claiming human rights.
But are legal scholars discussing these things, or is it sort of the elephant in the room?
The elephant in the room is the idea of absolute values. I often talk to students about this and I say, okay, you really feel very strongly that this is wrong. Why is it wrong? Is it just your view? And if somebody else has a different view, isn't their view as valid as yours? And when we come to issues of right and wrong, relativism really falls short, because ultimately we have to have a basis for saying something is right beyond the fact that I believe it.
Yeah, so I mean, even the relativist basically lives like there are absolutes and hopes no one asks the question.
That's exactly right.
Some Christians would like to legislate Christian morality into society so that non-Christians too should live the way God intended according to the Bible. How would you respond to that approach?
I don't think Christians should be involved in legislating Christian values. I think Christian values can inform the way in which Christians are engaged in public debates and think about certain issues. We've got to remember that we are governing for a whole society, and those things which are specifically Christian are those values which are not shared by the whole society. So we need to think about what aspects of our Christian faith represent norms for the whole community and what are simply aspirational things for Christians to try to aim for. Let me give you an example. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "You must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Now, I wouldn't want to enshrine that in law. It's an aspiration, it's something that you should aim for. And many Christian values are things which Christians would acknowledge they could not do and cannot do without God's help, and therefore they shouldn't be norms for the whole community.
Thank you very much.